Hello, Rebels. Welcome to The Base. I'm Steve Hilton. Joined today, I'm going to set you up this way, Kristen, my Latina co-host, Kristen Garcia-Dumont. Why am I saying that today?
So fitting today. But I feel less Latina than our guest, who is full Latino. So he wins.
Yeah. Our guest today is going to help us understand something we talk about often on this show. It's actually a really interesting conversation that's going on around the country as well, but especially here in California, and that is the changing demographics of our sort of political story in this country, particularly focusing on the Latino vote and how that has been changing, evolving, moving towards a more conservative framework. If you look at what the polls are suggesting, we saw a little bit of that in the recall, of course. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Just a reminder, make sure you follow us on Spotify and YouTube and Apple, everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure you share this conversation. Tell everyone about how great this show is. We love to see all your support. We love all the growing numbers of people listening in. We want to keep going. So thank you for your support. Thank you for telling everyone about California Rebel Base. I want to introduce our guest now, Pablo Kleinman. He's an entrepreneur, political commentator, and relevantly to the way I was just explaining what we want to get into in this show, he was the former host of a show with a fantastic name, a kind of soulmate for this show, as it were, called Radio Free California. And that was on Univision, which of course is a massive Spanish language media empire. He was the former host, and there is a very interesting story about that. And that's what I'd love to start off with, Pablo. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, I was dying to talk to you ever since I read about your experiences at Univision. So for those who haven't followed that, just tell us a little bit about what you were doing there and why you are now a former host of a show at Univision.
So Univision in Los Angeles has a flagship talk radio station, KTNQ. It's an AM, 1020 AM. And it's been a talk radio for a long time, but at some point they decided to go all sports, and that tanked. And then finally in 2019, they decided to relaunch it as a talk radio station. They hired the whole staff. They had their programming together. And the program is not all political. They have self-help psychologists and shows for entrepreneurs. But they do have a pretty considerable political block of programming. They had all left-wing hosts, including the host of the Univision nighttime news in Los Angeles, who's quite a liberal, and who on the radio, on television, not so much, but on the radio, he's very much partisan. They had left 1 hour slot for a conservative. They even wanted to call it the conservative show. And it was basically to showcase that, they're actually objective or at least pluralistic. And I was the last one that they brought in because they were looking for someone. And I had done some shows for them years ago. I was the alternate host for a show that went on Univision America, which was a network years ago. And they asked me to come and do this. And even though I grew up in Los Angeles and I stay on top of California politics, I even ran for office. I was a California Republican Party official at some point.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I ran against Brad Sherman in 2014.
Oh, Brad Sherman. He's hilarious. I got to say, he's a good sport, though. I've had him. He's such a sort of classic partisan, but he's a nice guy. I've had him on my Fox show. I had the most brilliant argument with him once. I completely nailed him on a point of fact which he was squirming about, but he took it very well. And I've got a soft spot for Brad Sherman, even though he's highly partisan. I just think I've met him a few times, and he's actually a decent guy.
So for the past few years, I've actually been based out of Miami, and they asked me to do this show, and they wanted some boring name, and I actually thought of this cheeky name, Radio Free California, Radio California Libre, because in a way I feel like an exile, and it was a ringer on when Charles de Gaulle was broadcasting from London into occupied France. So they, of course, didn't pick this up at all, and they liked the name, and that's the name we went with. And so this was the only center-right show on the station. It did much better than they expected, even though they weren't doing much promotion, and you know, they were running some ads throughout the day, but they weren't very enthusiastic about it. But I had my freedom, and when angry callers would say, how is it that they let you say these things, I'd respond that I'm actually doing my job. I'm supposed to present this perspective here, so this is what I'm doing. And things were fine up until I would say the last month before the November election, when
in 2020, the one just now.
Yes,
right.
When Twitter censored the New York Post, and they tried to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story, I started talking about it and making up for it, and counting every day that the oldest newspaper in the United States had been silenced on Twitter, which was a total of 16 days. And I was questioning already at that point, saying, look, this doesn't sound like a fair and free election if we have media, even if it's not state-owned media, but it's private media, censoring credible stories and or trying to say that they're not true without showing any proof to that avail. So,
you can't say that. It's not a free and fair election. That's death right there from the ruling elite.
You can't say that in a free and fair country.
Exactly.
Right, but that started getting them upset. And I started getting messages saying, stick to the facts, and don't do propaganda.
Messages from the audience or from inside?
From the program director. No, from the program director. I'd get a text message, while I was on the air, saying that. Pretty mild, and I wasn't silenced. They started playing a disclaimer, going into commercials and coming back, saying that the views presented on the show do not represent the views of the company, which they weren't doing before.
And by the way, I'm assuming they didn't do when they have left-leaning shows on air.
You know what? I think at some point they started doing it for everyone, just in case. But this is basically what triggered it. This is what triggered it. And I continued doing the show. I mean, I was counter-programmed the rest of the day. So I knew that I was serving a purpose for them, because I was allowing them to say that they were presenting more than one point of view, although, this was only 10% of the airtime, and the rest of the time they were presenting a very partisan, anti-Trump, very, very, very pro-Democrat point of view. But I felt that the opportunity to say what I was saying, even if it was during a reduced amount of the station's airtime, was still worthwhile, and I kept doing it, and I was happy doing it, and the response from the audience was very good. So everything was fine. Then during Christmas 2020, I got COVID. And so there were some days that we weren't going on the air because they were holidays, and I believe it was Thursday, Friday, two consecutive weeks for the 24th and 25th, and then the 31st and the 1st. But then those days in the middle, I couldn't go on the air because I was feeling very much under the weather, and I had COVID up until January 3rd. And then I restarted. But on the 5th, for reasons, I mean, this may actually be legit. They told me that we weren't going to be able to do live programming for a week because they had to quarantine most of the engineers because there had been a case of COVID in the building. And I was sort of upset because the other political shows were able to have their engineers and were able to go live, but mine wasn't. But they said it was just a scheduling issue. But that only that was on the 5th and then on the 6th. And then on the 7th, I received an email from production saying that my show was suspended.
Just like that, out of the blue.
Just like that, out of the blue.
And in an email. Well, I mean, so.
Well, actually, I got a message, and then I spoke with the producer, a very nice lady, and she said probably what she was told that she had to tell me, and it was that advertisers no longer wanted to advertise on my show after January 6th. So this was the reason. I didn't buy it.
By the way, had you said anything? I don't know, in support of what happened on January the 6th, or anything that
I didn't even have a chance because we were off the air.
You weren't on air,
right?
It's crazy.
So I didn't have a chance. Maybe I would have said something that they would have disliked even more than the stuff I said before, but I didn't say anything in support, and especially because I didn't even have a chance to do so. I was questioning the fairness of the election for many reasons. I wasn't saying that actual fraud had taken place, even though I've been a critic of our electoral system for a very long time, especially in California, where you don't even need to show ID. And that was even before the improvements that they introduced last year. So, but back, I mean, I'm talking years ago, I even tried showing ID one time at my polling place, and the guy sitting there was like, "No, I don't have to see it," and they really don't want to see your ID. And because I was in the Republican Party Central Committee for LA County, we had access to a database. It's a private service, and essentially anybody can buy access to this. It's called Political Data Inc. And you can see a list of all the registered voters. You can see their address. You can see their phone numbers if they have them on the database. And you can see what their party registration is. You can see which elections they voted in for the past at least 10 years. You can see if they vote by mail, if they vote in person, if they vote early, if they vote late. You can see everything. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to organize a fraud caravan, this is a very easy thing to do, because you just pull a list of the people that don't vote in primaries, or don't vote in midterms, or don't vote at all and haven't voted in 10 years. And you just have somebody impersonate them in all these different places. And it's very easy to do. It probably happens, even though there's no proof, because nobody actually investigates this. But the system is very insecure. And when we live in a democracy that it's one person, one vote, this is a major problem.
can I jump back because I want to talk about the advertising point before we get too much into sort of the substance of what you were talking about. And Steve and I have touched on this in other podcasts, which is the whole business model. Remember, the free and fair press is actually neither. It is a business that needs to make money through advertisers. And advertisers in very recent past have gotten very political. And so when they don't want to advertise on your show or other shows, I mean, this happens to Fox News, this happens, to a lot of different people. That's a very difficult position for these companies to be in because they need that advertising revenue. So my question for you is, did you have advertisers and then they left, or from day one, because this sounds like sort of poor planning, if they didn't have anybody who wanted to advertise on a conservative show, it was sort of set up to fail. So did you have them and you lost them, or what happened on that advertiser journey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't buy this. These were advertisers that were advertising throughout the station's programming for the most part. It's not like I had a certain set of advertisers for my time slot that were different from the others. And the truth is that apparently, and I heard this from sources inside Univision, there was a lot of backlash after they canceled me. People started asking. They started saying that I was renegotiating my contract. There was a particularly terrible instance in which the person whose show was airing in my time slot, who happens to be the wife of the president of Univision in Los Angeles, said that I had resigned, and which wasn't true, and they never made her recant that or correct that wrong information. But about a month later, or even less than that, but about a month later, I spoke with the president of Univision in LA. He told me he wanted me back, but he said that because of this advertising issue, I had to be flexible, and we had to work out a different deal. And I said I was completely flexible, and we agreed that I would not receive a salary. Instead, I would be paid in advertising minutes, and also I would have the syndication rights for the show for the rest of the country outside of California. And we were going to rename it Radio Free America, and everything was pretty much agreed. And I had already spoken with friends in Los Angeles that said that they could take care of selling the advertising for the show, that wasn't going to be a problem. Quite the opposite. They're like, you're going to make more money than you were getting from Univision by doing this. So it was all set to go. This was February 8th. I was supposed to start on the 15th. Then that same day, they were going to do an MOU so that the legal department wouldn't get in the way. But on the 15th, I didn't get the MOU. The program director said, let's just, so we don't have any issues, let's wait until you get it and then we start. But I didn't get it for 2.5 months. I didn't get anything, and I didn't even get any responses. And finally, I did get a contract, an actual contract from Univision, which was pretty standard, and it was everything that we had negotiated. Essentially, everything was what we said, and it looked good until you got to Schedule A or Addendum A or something like that, and that was the poison pill right there. They were demanding, this was me with a producer that works for them in the studio, an engineer in the studio, and I was doing this from my home office with a microphone and connecting through Comrex. And they demanded that I get either 5 or 6 different insurance policies, workers' comp with up to $5 million coverage per incident, all these different things. And I'm like, this must be a mistake. Like this, maybe just this is something you put into all the contracts. And no, they said no, and they said that none of that could be removed. And essentially, they were making me spend thousands of dollars in insurance, useless insurance, when they weren't going to pay me anything. And when I had to still sell the advertising for the show, it just made it all commercially unviable on purpose. So that's essentially what happened. And I think it was deliberate. And I think they just wanted this to go away. And I actually waited a little bit longer. I didn't disclose everything that happened until much later. I was dealing with a very tragic family issue, and I didn't want any bad karma coming my way. And so I decided, to let it stay or rest for a while. But finally, I thought it was necessary for me to say what happened, because they can't get away with it like that without any consequences.
Yeah. So when was your last broadcast with them?
Yes.
Back in January?
Yes. It was back in January.
And so it went on for all these months. And what
was the most controversial thing you think you said?
I was actually...
You reflect back and you go, God, you know what? I really went out on an edge when I said blah, blah, blah. Because I don't want people who listen to think that it was something so fringe. So what was the craziest thing you said?
Nothing crazy, nothing fringe. I had guests. I would talk about normal issues like school choice. And this was a regular center-right radio show. What did I say? I talked about, the lack of freedom. I talked about... I'd have many listeners call me and berate me for supporting President Trump. And I would engage them and I would listen to them. And everybody was always telling me that I was too patient with a lot of these people. And I was, because I wanted them to be able to express themselves, which they weren't able to do.
Yeah, you want to have a conversation.
And it was a conversation, exactly.
Yeah.
And it made it more interesting. And I would say that... usually, my standard response was that I thought Trump had been magnificent for the Hispanic community in America, in economic terms, just the way the country was going, and home ownership among Latinos increased more than ever during Trump's first 3 years. And I was saying, I understand that he said some things 3-4 years ago, even before he was a candidate, because he needed to draw attention to a campaign in a field of 16 candidates where he was the only one without a political experience. But look at his deeds and look at what he's doing. And has he ever done anything to harm the Latino community? He has not, clearly not. And so, there was nothing fringe. There was nothing crazy, seriously. And this is all, obviously it's in Spanish, but all these old shows are still available online.
There's so much
Spotify and iHeart. So people can hear them. There's nothing, outside of the mainstream that was said on that show.
What's interesting, I think...
it was just that I was the only one talking about this.
Yeah,
I was
that's
the only
point.
one
That's
talking
the point.
about
You're the only
this.
one. And that's what you're the only... That's what's amazing, if you think about all of this. There's so much here. I'm so interested in this whole question. Let's just look at that. Let's start where the point you just made. You're the only one. So let's just take California at this point. Biggest state in the union, 40 million people, 5th largest economy in the world, a really significant place. The fact that it's amazing that you were the only Spanish language conservative commentary show on. Is it as bold a statement as that, or would you qualify it by saying on a major outlet, or you know what I mean? How would you exactly define?
This was the only center-right talk radio show in Spanish in California
right
radio.
there. How many people are we talking about? What is the size of the total population? It's the largest group. It's the largest demographic group in California, isn't it?
It's California is about 40% Hispanic right now. Close to 40%, 39 something. Same as Texas. And so it's I mean, most Hispanics speak English, of course, but a lot of them, even though they speak English, they enjoy listening to Spanish language radio and television for cultural reasons, for, maybe because the topics that are discussed are topics that they find more interesting or closer to their own interests. So Univision Channel 34 in Los Angeles has been number one for years in the LA market. It has beaten all of the major networks. So we're talking about a pretty big audience. And yes, I was the only conservative, libertarian, Spanish language talk show in all of California.
And it's a super diverse group. I think people forget that Hispanic, Latino, that's an extremely broad umbrella that covers a lot of different groups that don't agree on lots of things, including politics. And there are a very impressive number of actually center-right or even right Latinos. So it was a smart business decision to have this show. The fact that you're the only one is sort of alarming and bizarre. But to not be prepared to sort of take some heat is very odd to me. That it's almost like they were surprised that they got some advertiser pushback. Of course you're going to get advertiser pushback.
And you know what? But I don't buy the advertiser pushback.
You think it's a cover. You think it's a cover.
I don't think that's the story,
You just think it's silencing a conservative.
I think that's what it was. And I think that they cringed every time I spoke. They had me there, but it just, their blood boiled many times with many of the things that I would say, which were perfectly normal things. But
in a sense, there's a kind of parallel with where strong conservative voices inside other mainly liberal or overwhelmingly liberal media institutions. New York Times is a good example, and Barry Weiss, who left, high-profile columnist, had been at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, hired specifically to be a conservative voice. And not by anyone.
And Barry, I've known Barry for many years. I wouldn't really characterize her as conservative.
She's that's just a sort of shorthand, but she's hardly, like your, sort of hard right Fox, Trump support. You know what I mean? She's just not that. She's far from that. When she left the New York Times, where she couldn't stand it anymore, was so, the specifics that she revealed there of just how horrible and unpleasant they made her life. Did you experience any of that on a personal level? Did you get an actual nastiness from colleagues inside Univision at any point?
Very little. The host of the most liberal show they have, which came after mine, was actually my neighbor in LA. He's somebody that I've known for a long time, and we used to have lunch together. And he didn't used to be as left as he is now. And actually, it's interesting because he was openly along with Antonio Villaraigosa. They were co-heads of an anti-Trump super PAC last year. So he was a host. And he was open about, the fact that he was so biased that he was raising money against Trump. So I didn't do any of that. I was, in that sense, much more objective, if you want to say. But no, I didn't sense nastiness. Some people were annoyed with me. And then there are some conservatives that were telling me how excited they were, but they are unable to express themselves because they don't want to lose their jobs.
Oh, inside the company?
Yes.
Oh my, isn't that just so? I mean, I'm not surprised, Kristen, but I mean, it's just it's so disgusting to hear that. Every time you hear a story like that, and of course, it's so common now.
It's the state of the world, it feels like,
it's
right?
truly disgusting. Actually, Barry, again, we're talking about her a lot, but she put that really well in a piece the other day, where she had the number of people who literally have two lives now. A private life where they can be their true selves, amongst trusted friends and family, whatever, and then, a public life where they can't say what they think at work, on Twitter, on Facebook, or social media, anywhere, because they'll lose their jobs or what, or be
that piece for El American, which is the one that you probably read, where I was interviewed, and they actually spoke with some people from Univision when they were writing it. They did talk to a couple of sources that did not want to be on the record, and that's the reason why, because they didn't want to be on the record because they didn't want to lose their jobs.
So the point you made is that there's this sizable group of people, exactly as you say, Kristen. It's not a monolithic group by any means, and certainly not. I'm assuming none of us on this show would sign up for Latinx. But, if you do, I'd like to. Yeah.
That's there's actually a poll from I believe it's a communications or an advertising firm out in LA, and only about 2% of the people that they interviewed wanted the Latinx label. Surprisingly,
it's actually offensive. I think it's offensive. It's like, it really is something that somebody random who's not part of the Latino community cooked up to say, we think your language is sexist. Let us help you.
Exactly.
It's so disgusting.
Exactly. But on the broader politics, I think it's so interesting. Like, first of all, big picture nationally, you saw in the 2020 election, and this is something that there's really been brought to the fore by this pollster, political guru on the left, David Shor, SHOR, if anyone wants to follow what he's been doing on it. He's the one that's been really sort of publishing on this and drawing it to the Democrats' attention. I think I'm right in saying that the swing towards Republicans, towards Trump, really big. It's a really big shift. It's not a tiny little thing. And it wasn't just, as some of the commentariat say, it's all Cubans in Florida because they hate communism, and like a couple of Venezuelans or whatever. It's much broader than that. There's Mexican Americans in Texas and so on, and so it's a big thing. And when they looked at some of the issues that were driving Latinos away from the Democrats towards Republicans, away from Biden towards Trump, the ones that came up most frequently were the general economic story, as you mentioned, more specifically the association with the pandemic shutdowns, but then the interesting ones as well were the Black Lives Matter, the all that, everything that came up in the wake of the George Floyd situation, and defund the police and all that stuff, like, horrified a lot of people in the Latino community, and immigration. As I've always argued, I'm an immigrant here. My parents were immigrants from Hungary to the UK. I've always had this view with public consent for immigration, especially from immigrants who've done it the right way, the hard way often. It depends on government control of immigration. When it's kind of uncontrolled, people don't like that. Could you talk about that whole set of issues, whether that matches your experience? I mean, you were there every day talking to people in California. Is that what you were picking up? Is there anything specific about California that you would add?
I used to say fairly regularly, I used to tell the audience, I used to say, if you're an immigrant, you know how it is to live in a place where there's no rule of law. I mean, this border that we have with Mexico California used to be part of Mexico before. Then it wasn't. But when it was part of Mexico, it looked like the rest of Mexico. And suddenly you have rule of law, and you have people being equal under the law, and you have all these different this whole framework that is what made the difference. And so I would tell the audience, I'm like, you have a special responsibility not to allow this to happen in the United States as well, because you know how it is and you've seen it, and you're here because you didn't want to be part of that and you didn't want to live under that. So you have a special responsibility not to allow that to happen here as well. The agenda that the Democrats are pushing, especially since Obama, has a lot of these ingredients and this lawlessness and a lot of this all these measures that no longer qualify as just living under the rule of law. So I think that I would talk about that. I would talk about the labor unions. The labor unions in Latin America are notoriously corrupt. The labor unions in California are notoriously tied to the Democrats, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting for the Democrats. I mean, that independent contractor, what was it? Assembly Bill 5, I believe. I mean, this was written by a former union leader out of San Diego, and it's like she's working for the people, but she's really still working for the union.
Exactly.
And people were really against that, and so and they could see the similarities between many of these policies and the policies that made their countries of origin or the countries of origin of their parents so undesirable, and for them to be willing to come to the United States most of the time with nothing and to start from scratch, because here it was different. So I would talk about that, and it was a recurring issue, and of course many times the responses were just trying to deflect or talk about racism and these, dangling these distractions which had nothing to do with what I was saying, simply because they had no answer for that. My friend Rick Grinnell is proposing he's leading a proposition to make education savings accounts possible in California. This is something brand new. When I ran back in 2014, this is one of the issues that I was talking about the most, which is school choice. School choice disproportionately benefits minorities, and the Democrats are completely torn between serving the interests of the unions and serving the interests of the people that they supposedly represent. And that's why they oppose school choice, because the unions tell them that they don't want it. But it's a winning issue. I think it's going to be probably the top issue for Republicans if they want to again be competitive in California, because the Democrats are totally against it, but the working class,
that's it,
really supports school choice.
Can we talk about the racism point a little bit? Because I do think I even am dismissive of it because I'm so sick of being called a racist. But it is such a powerful point that still works. And it does still work actually very effectively in the Latino community, where people just simply associate the GOP with racists. And that's it. Like, the analysis totally stops there of, I don't care what policy you're going to talk to me about. I don't believe I can support people who are racist and who want to send me back or who think lesser of me because of the color of my skin. So period, full stop. I'm all in on blue. So, you have to get a little deeper and get specific to dissuade this point of view, but I don't want to be too dismissive of it because it's working. And it really still works with the young population of Latino voters, and they're coming out in larger and larger numbers and voting, and they really do believe it to their core that the GOP is racist. So how to best address that? Because you were in the thick of it when you were in politics.
Well, it's a fantasy. It's not true. It really isn't true. And when I ask people to give me examples, everybody would talk about Pete Wilson.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
wow, we're going way back.
And I was like, okay, are we talking about 86-year-old or now 87-year-old retired for a generation former governor of California? Are we talking about the same person? Because we're talking about, we're in the year 2021, and you're talking to me about somebody that was governor of California in the mid-90s. So they don't have any more arguments than that. They really don't. I also played a few times a clip of Cesar Chavez, who the Democrats have for years been trying to turn into the Latino MLK. And Cesar Chavez was really for deporting undocumented workers.
Yeah, and very tough immigration control at the border. Yeah.
And there is an interview with PBS where he even uses the word wetbacks, and over again he talks about the wetbacks and the wetbacks. And people were shocked when I played this. And even though I played it different times, different weeks, they couldn't believe that he actually said that.
Yeah, wait till they start cancelling him. Although Cesar Chavez avenues and squares and streets are going to be sort of renamed.
But the whole racism thing is just a distraction. It's and a lot of people, the people that start paying attention, they realize it is. Unfortunately, the hosts on Univision are pushing this line because they do. They are partisan Democrats, and it's very interesting. Many of these people talking about racism are actually white Mexicans from the ruling elite that came to the United States with a college degree, and in Mexico they don't support the hard left. In Mexico, they're part of the establishment. But here, they are not. And here they talk about racism. And here they talk about many of these issues. And in a way, I feel that they're trying to promote the same agenda that succeeded, or that is the prevalent agenda in their countries of origin. It's very interesting. They are poisoning the minds of these people who came to America under very different circumstances than they did, and this is never talked about, and that's why it's so hard for me to be invited now on these shows in Spanish language media, because
we'll have lots more conversations, Pablo. We'll have to wrap it up in a second. I just wanted to, just on your point, Kristen, I think a big part of it, if they call you a racist, just saying no, I'm not a racist, in the end doesn't, it's not going to persuade anyone. But showing it, candidates, people running for office, doing things in the Republican agenda that clearly help people, and then the votes, right? The numbers don't lie. It was, okay, you can keep calling us racist, but actually more and more people of color are voting Republican. So who's racist now? And then, and as I love saying, because it annoys them so much, I just want to highlight also the point you made, Pablo, about the working class, is that increasingly the Republican Party is moving in the direction of becoming the party of the rich, white, and woke. And they hate that, but that's the direction it's moving in, and it's, I think, incredibly cool. And I hope that we'll be able to push that forward here in California. Just one last question, Pablo, before we go. What's next for you? What are your plans?
Well, I'm still doing what I was doing. I wasn't living off the radio show. I'm involved in a few ventures. I'm always helping people start new companies, and that's what I like, and that's what I enjoy, and that's what I'm still doing. I'm also involved right now in putting together an educational project that is called La Primera, which aims to have a similar impact among Hispanics that PragerU has had with the general population. So we're following that model.
Oh, interesting.
And they're actually
really cool
supporting us.
That's really interesting. As I say, I have a feeling we'll have lots more conversations. I love this one.
I hope so.
Pablo. For more like this, of course, make sure you follow this show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Last word, Kristen?
No, Pablo, I think that's amazing. And one of my circle around to the racism comment is tagging back to your school choice point. Maybe that's one of the key factors as well, is like to make sure that there are other voices teaching our children so that when they hear this racism word, they want specifics, they want facts, right? And facts will matter if we truly can get school choice in there. So thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. And yes, and I think this is going to be very important in the next election. I hope it qualifies for the ballot, and I think it's going to. A lot of people are going to talk about it.
Thank you, Pablo. Great to see you today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And make sure you come back and join us for the next California Rebel Base.
Looking forward to it.